Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. My name is Dan Coe, filling in for David Pakman. Please send good vibes his way in the birth of his new baby and his whole family. I used to work in the White House and have a podcast called The People's Cabinet, as well as a YouTube channel. Please subscribe. It's so helpful as someone new to the content world to have new subscribers, and I deeply appreciate all of your comments and feedback. I want to start with an article in Politico about DOGE. So Politico just published an article called "Just How Much Has DOGE Exaggerated Its Numbers? Now We Have the Receipts." A Politico analysis of DOGE data reveals the organization saved less than 5% of its claimed savings from nearly 10,100 contract terminations. And so there's a lot in this article, but I just want to read one passage. Through July, DOGE said it saved taxpayers $52.8 billion by canceling contracts. But of the $32.7 billion in actual claimed contract savings that Politico could verify, DOGE's savings over that period were closer to $1.4 billion. Despite the administration's claims, not a single one of those $1.4 billion will lower the federal deficit unless Congress steps in. Instead, the money has been returned to agencies mandated by law to spend it. Okay, so remember the big Madison Square Garden rally with Trump and Musk, where Trump asked Musk, how much you think you can save from the government? His answer was $2 trillion. Now, anyone who spent any time in government knew that was complete horseshit because there is so much that goes into the budget, and there's only so much that you can do with what is called the non-mandatory part of the budget. So wiping out defense spending, all of that, which I'm not advocating to do. Even if he were to do that, there would still be something like a $6.3 trillion budget that you would have to figure out where to get the money from. That only accounts for 700 billion or so. So how do we think about this going forward and the lessons that we could learn from DOGE? There's a lot in here, but to start, the amount of morale impact this has on career employees. There are 3 million employees in the United States who work for the federal government. It is so hard to recruit those people because the salaries are nowhere as good as the private sector. The top talent is always being drawn away. And so the way you do it is to provide good benefits and job security and the idea of patriotism to your country. With Elon Musk marching in on day one and asking people to resign, demoralized, and I heard it all the time from people I knew in the career government, demoralized career public officials. That was the first thing. The second thing is, Elon Musk had this reputation of this businessman coming in and being able to change things. He turned Tesla around, et cetera. It is this larger thought process of these business people who have no experience in government, and candidly, Donald Trump is another example of this, that they can just march in to the White House and to the administration, and they're going to have just as much success in an industry they know nothing about, right? Many of these elected officials would not do well at Tesla or any private sector organization like that, but they know how to operate in government. Elon Musk had no idea what he was doing, and it became very clear at the outset that that was the case. So as we look at this and as we think about it, I think the lesson is government is a craft. It's an industry, just like every other place. And I don't say industry in a disparaging way. I say it in a way that this is a complex organizational structure that if you have no experience, it's going to be very difficult for you to be effective. And he made a ton of mistakes. As you know, he has alienated Trump has alienated him. Far more is being added to the deficit now than what would ever be saved at DOGE at this point. Elon has said so. He has lamented that fact. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't quite understand. The movement of foreign aid and the celebration that Elon Musk had around USAID and our role in the world and what he claimed was waste and fraud will have generational impact for all of us. So I brought on the principal deputy national security advisor to President Biden. His name is John Feiner. He was in charge of basically running the day-to-day of the national security apparatus, everything from October 7th response to how we think of ourselves in the world in the United States. Talk a little bit about the impact of USAID and how we move forward as a federal government post-DOGE. So here's my interview with John Feiner. John Feiner, Principal Deputy National Security Advisor to President Biden. My question to you is about DOGE. There's a lot of articles that have kind of autopsy aftermath of Elon and the DOGE project that basically is saying that there's a lot of inflated numbers in terms of savings. One area that is obviously well documented is the gutting of USAID. I think a lot of Americans don't quite understand what USAID did. I'm not asking you to explain all of that, but what I am asking you to explain is, with some of the extensive cuts to USAID, what international interest does that affect for us, and what should we be keeping in mind as we proceed going forward?
Sure, Dan. I'll give one somewhat concrete example because I think it's easier sometimes to understand specific illustrations than it is the big numbers. By the way, the big numbers are horrifying, not the dollar values, which I think are not the right way to think about this, but more how those dollars translate into lives saved in the countries where the United States is focusing its aid. And you've seen these studies that show tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives saved in a relatively short period of time, and all of that being reversed with the cuts. But the way I like to understand the impact is pick an area like global health. Okay, the United States goes around the world and has a range of programs, many of them through USAID or other partner agencies, to try to address or even eradicate deadly diseases in countries far from the United States, but diseases that, if left to get out of control, could end up very easily in the United States, the way people travel back and forth these days. When I was in office, many times a month, I would have public health experts come into my office and say, look, some of our USAID people in the field or our CDC, Center for Disease Control people in the field, just called and said there's this outbreak in a faraway place, maybe the Democratic Republic of Congo, which many people couldn't find on a map, but is a major country in Central Africa. And it looks like this disease may be the kind of fever that once we test it, we will determine could be the Ebola virus. It's killing a small number of people in a faraway village. So we now have to ramp up our operation to try to stamp out that outbreak in the DRC and also take measures to prevent that disease from spreading to other countries and ultimately to the United States. At the end of the day, and this is important, the primary goal here is to prevent these deadly pathogens, these deadly biological threats from coming here to the United States. This is not just about charity to countries far away. So we would do things like check on the supply of our vaccines. If we didn't have enough vaccines, ramp up the production of those vaccines. Decide how many of those vaccines to send to the field to try to stop it there and how many to keep in the United States for the worst case scenario where this disease arrives here. We would look at travel restrictions for people who had been in those countries. Should we limit their ability to come to the United States? Should we test them on arrival? All of this is informed by public health analysis and expertise, but it starts with having people in the field to identify the problem early enough that you can get your arms around it. I worry now that almost none of that is happening because of the cuts we've made, the people who are doing this work who have gone out the door, and we have put not just people far away at risk, but people here at risk as a result.
Can you also talk about how foreign adversaries or allies even may fill in the gaps of the aid that we were giving and how that could be concerning to Americans?
Yeah, it's not the purpose of our foreign assistance, but it's a very important ancillary benefit of it, that it helps us deepen our connection, our relations, improve our ties to other countries in ways that benefit us, all over the world. And pulling back those programs creates this vacuum in those relations that other countries can fill. And I think in places like Africa and even in South America, in our own hemisphere, in Southeast Asia, you are going to see countries like China and Russia rush in to fill the gap, not in altruistic ways, the way the United States sometimes does, but basically by going to these countries and saying, look, you thought the United States was a dependable partner. They're not, obviously. They just pulled all of this support from you. So you should move in the direction of us. And they will try to extract things from those countries, whether it's access to minerals that the United States also needs to fuel our future economy, whether it's votes in international institutions like the United Nations that go against our interests, whether it's siding with Russia or China as they try to coerce their neighbors, Taiwan in the case of China or Ukraine in the case of Russia. But they will try to use this to boost their support and their standing in the international community by basically saying the United States is not as good a partner as you thought. We're better, and you should move into our camp.
And that means what? That in the case of an eventual conflict where allies are needed globally, they're now more inclined to want to collaborate with those countries instead of ours. Is that right?
It means countries less willing to speak out against coercion by Russia and China against other countries, which is a huge problem in the world. It sometimes will mean those countries standing up and supporting Russia and China, even though they know that what they are doing is wrong. It means those countries giving Russia and China access to their mineral wealth. I mean, these mineral inputs in places like Africa are really the fuel for the global economy, for things like clean energy revolution, modern battery technology. All of this relies on a supply chain that ties back into these countries that Russia and China will try to use their relations with these places to extract more and to dominate these areas that the United States needs access to as well. So there are more political benefits, there are more material benefits. And again, none of this is why we do foreign assistance, but it has been a very helpful byproduct of the fact that we had good relations with countries around the world. They know that we are willing to step up when they are in a time of need and a time of crisis. And if there is some giant health crisis, natural disaster in these places, the U.S., I think, inclination and ability to help countries address it will be much less than it was before. And that will mean the value of a partnership with us is much less than it used to be.
And finally, you've seen the entire apparatus at a very high level, our national security apparatus, our foreign aid apparatus. I know, speaking from the Department of Labor, where I used to be chief of staff, seeing what they've done and what they're proposing to the staff for things like inspectors at the work site, wage and hour disputes, et cetera, I know that it will take decades at a minimum to rebuild what they've already done if they were to stop today. I'm curious, in your perspective, quickly, how you've seen it, the stories you've heard about the different parts of State Department, for example, that are being affected. Even if today it stopped, how long it would take to rebuild what you think is necessary in this modern era?
Well, look, I hate to end on a pessimistic note, but I really worry about whether it is possible to rebuild a lot of what has been lost for two main reasons. Think about why people who have a lot of expertise, a lot of education, a lot of talent go into these jobs. If you are a PhD epidemiologist, why do you want to work in the government as opposed to a research institution out somewhere in the world? I think two basic reasons. One, you feel good about your public service. And two, you have job security. But unfortunately, given what has happened with DOGE, the disparaging of people's public service means it is harder for them to feel good about working in the government than they used to. A lot of the country, it seems like, has turned against government as a career and as an institution. Second, they don't have the job security they once had. Used to be, think once you got into these places, you were set for the next 20, 25 years if you decided you wanted to stay. That's no longer the case. So people are not going to settle for lower salaries, less flexibility and freedom to pursue other aspects of their professional life by coming back to the government now that those things have been robbed from them. And so I worry about efforts to rebuild. We're going to have to be creative about it. We're going to have to, I think, be realistic also about some of the things that DOGE identified that probably the U.S. government and USAID and these institutions should not have been doing, and not try to rebuild and reconstitute everything. I think that's going to be very important for Democrats, if and when we ever get back into power, to be sensible about what to try to put back into place and what actually should be done differently. But I think the challenge of getting people to come back into these roles who have other options is going to be really hard.
John Feiner, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.